Good afternoon and welcome to IFC webinars presented by IFC in conjunction with the International Code Council and Wildland Policy Committee of the IFC. Today's webinar is Wildfire Risk in the Built Environment. I am Richard Miller, your IFC staff moderator. A little bit about IFC and some upcoming events. November 14th through 17th is the VCOS Symposium in the Sun, Clearwater, Florida. And then December 4th through the 6th is the Technology Summit, TSI, this year in Oklahoma City for the first time. And it's a great opportunity. And then for Fire Life Safety section, next year's Community Risk Reduction will be back in Glendale again, May 13th through the 15th. So we're excited about this event and look forward to seeing lots of people in attendance. Today we have a big list of panelists. Chief Elizabeth Benarchek from the Fire Life Safety Section Board, a chief who's leading the risk reduction in her area. We have a video presentation by Dr. Lori Moore-Morell of the Fire Administration. Justice Jones from Austin Fire Department, Chief Rich Elliott from Kitasack Valley Fire and Rescue, and Chris Burnett from Colorado Division of Fire Prevention. So today is going to be a packed bunch of information, and we're very excited to have these great presenters. Before we begin, audio is being broadcast by a voice over internet protocol through your computer and speakers and headsets. Please make sure that your speakers or headsets are turned up and on and the volume is all the way up. Audience microphones have been muted for this presentation, but the Q&A is available. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please contact IFC support at webinars@ifc.org or via the chat function, as we will be monitoring that and answer any of your questions as we move forward in today's event. There'll be the chat functions, the Q&A. There are no handouts for today, but the presentation will be available at the end as a recording. But up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen as a participant, you can use the chat function and the Q&A function. We encourage everybody to use the chat function, type in, tell us where you're from and where you're at and what your assignment is. Are you in the community risk reduction space? Are you in code enforcement? Are you a building official? And so on. Share your information with others so that we can all have a great learning experience. At this time, I'd like to introduce first our mission specialist here for this operation is Chief Benarchek, who is a board member, and she's going to be leading us through this as your live moderator for this event for the Fire Life Safety section. And at this time, I'm going to pass it over to the Chief.
Thanks a lot, Chief Miller. And I am Chief Elizabeth Benarchek from Brighton Fire Rescue District in Brighton, Colorado. I am also an at-large board member for the Fire and Life Safety section of the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Really quickly, I would like to thank the Fire and Life Safety section, the International Code Council, and the Wildland Policy Committee. Those three organizations have helped put this webinar on today for everyone. And also thank you for everyone who is joining in out of your busy day today. I really appreciate that. A quick background about the Fire and Life Safety section. We deal with codes and standards is kind of our big lift that we do every year and every code cycle. We kind of organize and lead the FCAC, the Fire Code Action Committee, to make sure that the fire code is up to par every time that it is released every 3 years. Two hot topics that we've been working on in the past few years and currently is funding and special committee groups for all lithium-ion battery issues and also for home oxygen fires. So if you would be interested in volunteering or becoming a member, you can reach out to myself or Chief Miller with the International Association of Fire Chiefs for that. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Right now we have a special video coming from Dr. Lori Moore-Morell. And Dr. Lori Moore-Morell was appointed by President Joe Biden as the U.S. Fire Administrator on October 25th, 2021. Prior to her appointment, Lori served as the president and CEO of the International Public Safety Data Institute, which she founded after retiring from a 26-year tenure as a senior executive in the International Association of Firefighters. She began her fire career in 1987 as a fire department paramedic in Memphis, Tennessee. Lori is a doctor in public health and a data scientist whose work has changed fire and EMS deployment throughout the world. As the principal investigator and senior project manager, she oversaw the development of landmark reports and other tools to improve residential and high-rise fireground operations, community risk assessment, fire and EMS resource deployment, and big data analytics. In 2022, Dr. Moore Merrill convened the first summit on fire prevention and control since the 1974 founding of the U.S. Fire Administration. The summit brought the head of every relevant government agency and every major fire safety organization together in the same room to articulate and execute a national fire strategy for addressing firefighter recruitment, cancer screening, mental health, and climate change impact on the fire service. Dr. Moore Merrill believes that together we can turn a moment of crisis into an era of opportunity for the fire service. And here is a quick message from Dr. Lori Moore Merrill.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Lori Moore Merrill, the United States Fire Administrator. And kudos to the ICC and the IAFC for your continued work in advancing safe, sustainable, affordable, and resilient homes and communities. There is no time like the present to advance building codes at all levels of government. As many of you know, the USFA has a national fire strategy that focuses on 10 challenges that confront the fire service today. One of those challenges is building code implementation. The principal strategic goal is to create safer communities by implementing and enforcing codes and standards, especially in the wildland-urban interface and underserved and vulnerable populations, providing affordable and fire-safe housing. The work group strategy for this has established 3 priorities. The first is to have more fire service and government involvement to promote and protect the latest national codes and standards. Priority 2, to change the laws and the regulations to require homes receiving federal funding to be built to the latest national codes and standards. And 3, to create an advisory committee for the U.S. Fire Administrator according to the authority of Section 12 in the Fire Prevention and Control Act. Now, the report from this USFA work group and their progress and recommendations for next year will be presented at the U.S. Fire Administrators Summit on Fire Prevention and Control on October 8 this year. Another strategic goal in the National Fire Strategy is to address the impact of climate change on wildfire and the fire service as a whole. The priorities of this group are Priority 1, to review the 2023 Wildfire Commission's report and to crosswalk that report with the USFA work group effort. The second priority is to identify the gaps in training and look for interoperability between all responder groups. And finally, considering community engagement and communication. Now, this priority is key. Why? Well, in today's changing environment, particularly our changing climate, a single weather event, including a wildfire, can put someone out of their home temporarily or permanently. We know this situation has also affected the home insurance industry as well, with individual policies not being renewed across the nation. Now, how can homeowners with mortgages better know their risk and protect themselves and their investment? We all know that retrofitting is key. In fact, even if every new home built was built to code, we would still need to change the vulnerability of existing structures, particularly in the wildland-urban interface. Now, just 1 month ago, the USFA, in cooperation with Esri, launched a WUI awareness tool to help people know where they live. This tool contains information about how embers can impact your home as well, if another home in your environment, in your neighborhood, is burning. If you have not seen this new tool, please go to usfa.fema.gov/WUI or WUI. Use this tool in your presentations, in the community engagements that you do. You see, helping people understand where they live is really half the battle. To get the movement on the actions that are necessary to keep them safe. You should also know that the White House has a national initiative to advance building codes. Now, even so, we must acknowledge that the building community resilience is only a theory without adoption, implementation, and enforcement of building codes in all land areas. Those areas threatened by wind, those threatened by water, and those threatened by fire. And the threats are changing. The climate is introducing novel threats to areas where we often hear it's never happened here before. But what we know is that it will happen again. So we have our work cut out for us. I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you today and ask that you make the most of the conversations ahead. Please remember to align your actions with those already underway so that we can get synergy in our Fire Service One Voice effort to change the trajectory of fire in America. I wish you all a successful meeting and look forward to seeing you at the Fire Prevention and Control Summit on October 8th.
Wonderful. That was a wonderful message. Thank you, Dr. Lori Moore Merrill, for giving us that message. And for everyone in the audience, I would challenge you to listen and pick one of the priorities that Dr. Lori Moore Merrill spoke about, whether it's standards and codes and policies or smaller community resiliency efforts that you can take in your own community. Pick one of those and start working on it in your area. Or if you want to be involved more on the national level, reach out to anyone on this webinar and we can help you, and you can help us in those efforts to make the entire nation safer. Our next presenter comes to us from Austin, Texas, and I'll read right now a quick bio. This is Austin Fire Department's Wildfire Mitigation Officer, Justice Jones. Justice is on a mission to realign human culture with the fire environments we live in and are inextricably connected to. He divides his time between burning things and trying to keep other things from burning. In his current role, Justice serves as the Wildfire Mitigation Officer for the Austin Fire Department's Wildfire Division. This is where he helped lead Austin and the surrounding areas to embrace wildfire preparedness and become rapidly fire adapted. Most recently, Austin became the largest municipality in the country to adopt the ICC Wildland Urban Interface Code, ensuring sustainable wildfire resilience is built into Austin's future. Great job on that. I know that wasn't probably an easy lift. Before joining Austin Fire Department, Justice served as the Texas A&M's Forest Service's State Wildland Urban Interface and Prevention Coordinator, where he assisted communities across the state of Texas in enhancing their resilience to wildfires. In addition to his work locally, he also serves on multiple committees, including the International Association of Fire Chiefs Wildfire Policy Committee, the National Fire Protection Association's Technical Committee 1140, and is a member of the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network and a technical specialist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Thank you, Justice, for joining us. And now go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you for that introduction, Chief. And I'm appreciative and honored to be here and share a little bit of information about Austin's journey to becoming fire adapted and how we integrated wildfire regulatory measures into our strategy, including adopting the ICC Wildland Urban Interface Code. I wanted to start with a little bit of background on Austin's risk because it's a significant driving factor in everything that we do. We like to say understanding wildfire risk creates a common operating platform for all of us to have a shared perspective of the potential impacts of wildfire. Through our analysis and the analysis of others, we know that we really have significant issues. We're the highest potential economic losses outside of California in relation to recovering from a wildfire, and we have over 91,000 homes at high risk. And those homes are spread out across the county. One thing that's unique about Austin, unlike other counties in Texas, which are predominantly private owned, we have about 30% of our wildland areas in permanent conservation easements, which creates a permanent WUI for us, or wildland urban interface. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. In addition to understanding our wildfire risk, our fire environment's unique. Like many places, when we do have wildfires, we can count on the fact that our partners across the region are also going to be contending with their own fires. So our traditional mutual aid systems for structure fires aren't as effective in these wildfire sieges. We know from our modeling that we're not going to have 1.5 million acre wildfire like we're capable of having in the panhandle of Texas. Our fires will be relatively small because of our fragmentation of our wildlands, but they will result in relatively large losses, and that's what we're seeing across the landscape. And these fires almost instantly result in more exposures than available resources, as most of the firefighters on the call are aware of that fire environment that we operate in. In addition to understanding our fire environment, it's really important for us as we engage our community that we understand the values at risk, because wildfire impacts much more than just homes and wildlands. So we worked really diligently to understand how wildfire impacted other people's values, like our watersheds and our green infrastructure and our critical infrastructure, and maybe most importantly, our schools and our children. So understanding wildfire through the lens of multiple values has really helped us have a better understanding of our community's values at risk and who we need to engage to protect those values. And in Austin, we like to say that wildfire is everyone's fight, and it takes a community to prepare for a wildfire. If our goal is to become fire adapted, then we need to leverage all of our partnerships and collaboration to achieve that goal. And that means grassroots buy-in all the way to our elected officials. We work with our land managers to develop land management plans, with our property and resident owners to harden existing and future buildings, with our fire department to train to respond and know that in areas where the wildland urban interface code is in place, they have maybe a better chance of defending more structures with less resources. Ensuring that our emergency management officials understand the impacts of wildfire from an evacuation standpoint. So it really takes all hands to prepare for wildfire. And going into our efforts, we recognize that and had broad engagement of diverse stakeholders and cooperators. And partnership really is the key. I like to say, if you expect people to show up for your planning efforts and your values, it's important to show up for them. I mean, there's value in that. We've worked to integrate wildfire into other city planning efforts, including our climate resiliency plan, our urban forestry plan, our comprehensive plan. We've developed a joint city-county wildfire evacuation plan and a community wildfire protection plan, just to name a few of our planning efforts. There are many more. So we wanted to infuse wildfire as a priority, not just for the Austin Fire Department, because we all know that this isn't an issue that a fire department alone can solve. We wanted our partners to understand their role in addressing wildfire risk and how they can contribute to a more sustainable fire-adapted Austin. In this picture, you'll see city council members, state representatives, university faculty, all working together to enhance Austin's resiliency. So how do we prepare and put this in context? Austin has adopted the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy at the local level, and we did that by embodying that in our Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And I'm sure you're familiar with those tenets: fire-adapted communities, fire-resilient landscapes, and effective response. In addition to our CWPP update, we're adding information on climate resiliency, on equity and diversity and inclusion, and on enhancing our workforce capacity. But we use this national strategy as our platform for framing wildfire risk and wildfire preparedness in Austin. And it's given people a point of reference that's been very helpful moving forward. So our goal, and it's important as the fire service to understand our role in wildfire risk reduction, and that starts with us having situational awareness and knowing what our community is up against. We can clarify that through the risk assessment process, and that gives us a mechanism to communicate risk to the public, our partners, and leadership. Our job as a fire department is to pre-plan our response to wildfires and ensure that life safety remains the first priority. So we treat WUI fires as a rescue operation during an evacuation phase. Understanding that the work that we're doing to harden our built environment translates to potential operational success, since we are an operational fire department. We want to create realistic expectations of outcomes for the public and for our city leadership. Wildfire is a force of nature, and not everyone understands our capability in suppressing wildfires. So being honest about our limitations is really important. we want to leverage the great work that's happening in our community into operational advantage. And so when someone's doing a fuels project, we want our operational staff to know where that project is so they can leverage that to protect and make sure that we have defendable communities. So some of the tools that we used, I mentioned the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We also have fire danger signs at each of our fire stations just to make sure that firefighters and the public are constantly reminded that we are in a fire adapted ecosystem. That we've got a strategic plan that has been integrated at all levels in city government. We're leveraging all of our partnerships like the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network and great IFC programs like Ready, Set, Go. And we worked with Headwaters Economics to develop a community planning assistance for wildfire report. And this report served as a platform for many of the actions moving forward, and I'll summarize some of those. But one of the main recommendations that we improve wildfire-related coordination, capacity, and outreach. As Dr. Moore-Merrill mentioned, our first step was creating a wildfire division and staff that was dedicated to wildfire preparedness and prevention. As I mentioned, we integrated wildfire not only into the Austin Fire Department, but citywide performance measures. So this makes wildfire not just the fire department's job, but everyone's fight. We trained all operations staff in wildland firefighting, and we're moving through more and more advanced training. We developed a comprehensive strategic wildfire plan, as I mentioned, and formed a local wildfire coalition. All these were really important and integral for our success moving forward. We wanted to make sure we improved the city staff understanding of wildfire risk, and so through the CWPP and that risk analysis, we were able to communicate with city leadership the number of constituents at risk in their district, and this really helped solidify wildfire as a real tangible impact to the voting public. We participated in a lot of interdepartment and interagency working groups and planning teams. The same folks were going to ask to show up for us, and more importantly, we're looking forward and planning for climate resiliency in our overall planning efforts, and adoption of codes and building standards are climate resiliency. And so the next recommendation was to improve our land use and regulatory tools. We did this through adopting the ICC Wildland Urban Interface Code. And because embers are such a threat to our community, in addition to the model code, we added a section that required ember resistance in the first 1.5 miles from wildland areas, because our risk analysis and modeling clearly indicated embers can travel that far. We added an overlay so the public can understand if they're in the wildland urban interface and they need to take appropriate action. We provided recommendations to revise Austin's land development code and made sure that things like subdivisions with one way in, one way out couldn't happen in Austin again at a certain housing threshold. And there's a link to our overall wildland urban interface code if you want more technical details. What was really important is that we showed to our city leadership that we have alignment with our community values and our city's strategic plan. And on the left, you'll find the cross-cutting strategic themes for the city's plan. And on the right, you'll find our alignment with the Wildland Urban Interface Code and meeting those objectives for equity, for affordability, for innovation, for increasing environmental resiliency, for reducing potential wildfire losses, and to make sure that our community and stakeholders are actively engaged and understand the threats and impacts of wildfire and their role in taking action. So alignment with our ongoing city efforts was really important to illustrate to city leadership that this was for Austin and aligned with our values. Our wildland urban interface, as we defined, is over 647 linear miles, and that extends throughout the city and county. We have a diverse fuel system, but what is common across Austin and Travis County is we have a permanent wildland and wildland urban interface that we have to contend with. So how do we build support for adoption? One, you have to have a champion. What local officials are going to support your decision to adopt the code, because there will be opposition and there will be concerns about the impacts. For us, Councilmember Allison Alter stepped up to the plate and passed a resolution supporting the adoption of the Wildland Urban Interface Code. Our Fire Chief, Joel Baker, pushed really hard for other departments to support this effort. Our Fire Chief, Tom Boki, worked really, really closely with our building officials and our Home Builders Association to make sure they and our Board of Appeals understand the impacts of the code, and that we were clear about the local adoption process and what that would look like. So we also want to make sure that we leverage what's already in place in our community. And so ask you questions like, do you already have wildfire capacity in place? Are you working with the community to understand wildfire risks so they can support you in the time when you're proposing difficult things like adopting wildfire code? Who can you leverage to help you carry your message? And really importantly, make sure that your building officials are involved and they understand their critical role and the success of this adoption process. So just to wrap up with a few lessons learned from our overall adoption process. First of all, it started with a shared understanding of wildfire risk. And if we had skipped that step, there would be concerns about the impacts of what we were asking folks to do and if it was justified. It's really about people, relationships, and trust, not buildings. It starts with a cultural shift. And if you don't have buy-in from the community and community's leaders, it's going to be difficult to be successful in adopting the code. You want to seek support and buy-in from all levels, from that grassroots levels of community members, community groups, all the way up to elected officials. And as I mentioned, have a trusted point of contact, someone that can be the voice for this effort, that can be available to the community, and that has spent the time and effort to engage with stakeholders and cooperators to understand their needs and their values, and ask for help early and often. You're going to need it going into this process, and it's your key to success is collaboration. And timing is critical. To have the code ready for receptivity was a big measure of our success, and I think will help others moving forward. So with that, I would just like to reinforce Austin's motto is that wildfire is everyone's fight. And if folks in the community don't understand their role, it's our job to help them understand and plug in, because there's a place for everyone in making this shift from being at risk to empowered. Thank you.
Wow, Justice, that was fantastic. A lot of great information right there. I'm going to have to go back through those slides and take a lot of notes for myself. What really interests me was that ember resistance model you said you have, because I think those of us who dive deep into trying to prevent wildfires understand that it just takes a couple embers in a little bit of leaves, maybe gathered up on someone's back porch, and then before you know it, you've got residences or buildings burning down because of that. So I love that, and I loved your outline there. I think almost all neighborhoods have some sort of a little open space. And I liked how you highlighted the areas that were around that to bring that community into hopefully understanding the importance of getting on board and understanding what to do. And that it is an entire community effort, but we're going to spearhead that. So thank you very much, Justice, for that presentation. Really appreciate that information.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hop over to Chief Rich Elliott and a quick bio about Chief Elliott. Chief Elliott lives in Ellensburg, Washington with his wife of 35 years. Rich began his fire service career in Seattle area, where he worked in urban areas for 10 years before moving to Ellensburg. His education includes a BS in political science and an emphasis in labor studies and an MS in organizational development. Rich currently works in Catatus Valley Fire and Rescue as the Deputy Chief of Operations and Training, and serves as the chair for the International Association of Fire Chiefs Wildland Policy Committee. The Wildland Fire Policy Committee represents local government regarding wildland fire prevention, mitigation, suppression, and recovery. He is active in the community, focusing on improving behavior and mental health resources in the community, serving on the City Council, Health Network, and fire-adapted communities. Focus at work includes managing a fire-based advanced life service ambulance service, mental and behavioral health for firefighters, community risk identification, reduction and mitigation, and is active with the incident management teams in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you for joining us today, Chief Elliott.
Thank you. My bio was an attempt to try and compete with Justice, but I can't. So I'm going to talk to you kind of from two perspectives, and just an update to my bio. I am actually the immediate past chair for the Wildland Fire Policy Committee. I'm still a member and very proud to be a member, but we've rotated that position. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to talk a little bit from sort of another perspective. Obviously, what Justice was talking about, the data collection, the use of that data, the partnerships and the programs and that integration is sort of a model for most of us on this call. I'm going to talk a little bit more from kind of a rural communities perspective about how we took advantage and, sort of stole a lot of those ideas and implemented them on a smaller scale. And then I will talk a little bit about what the Wildland Fire Policy Committee is doing and maybe solicit some input back from you guys as to what we could do better. So I'm going to go back to my arrival in the Kittitas Valley. It was about 28, 29 years ago now. And I came from like I said, an urban response model, primarily structure, fire, hazmat, and EMS, into a community that is actually classified as a highland desert. It's in the rain shadow in Washington State, so we have a dry side and a wet side. And our fuel model is primarily shrub steppe, but in the drainages, we have heavier vegetation. We serve a community for fire protection, about 300 square miles, and for emergency medical services, about 1,400 square miles. And it's mostly rural and agriculture and wilderness area, but our populations is based around those creek drainages, which is where the WUI area really comes into play. I began to notice in the early 2000s that we started having more near misses with our responses. We had the wrong equipment in areas where there was clearly a wildland component to our response, and the neighboring fire district, which we eventually joined with and became Kittitas Valley Fire and Rescue, fought grass fires, but they didn't really look at the urban or the interface areas as being, sort of a little bit different animal and something they needed to evolve to. So when we joined those two organizations, we made a concerted effort to improve our training, improve our equipment, our decision-making processes for our responders. But we also began to look at our codes, and in proportion, we're a very rapidly growing county. There's only 50,000 people here, but we're in Seattle shadow and we're growing at a very high rate. And what we immediately encountered was this idea that, hey, the county's not on fire, don't mess with it. And development is our economic driver, which I understand. But one of the sort of the concepts that resonated really effectively later on in the process was convincing everybody that we needed to look at development as an asset and not as a liability. And that means looking at the development long-term and recognizing that those properties are altered forever, and they're going to exist in the built state for, likely 50 to 100 years. And so the cost of ownership and the cost of, or the risks that we embed in our communities need to be looked at when we look at the costs of developing things appropriately with adequate ingress, egress. Basically we look at the WUI code, we look at the fire code, and we advocate for those things that are going to make those properties safer and less expensive over the life of those properties to occupy. And that was really important for us, because in 2012, we had the first of what is now 15 10,000 acre plus fires in Kittitas County. The largest was, I think we've had two at about 80,000 acres. And when that fire occurred, it was called the Taylor Bridge Fire. Some things lined up, and we lost about 65 structures, primary residences, about 110 total structures. But more importantly, and the part that really hit home for me, was that during that event, about a 10-day fire, but particularly the first 24 hours, we had 3 near misses. We had 3 burnovers. They were county resources, not my own home agency, but it literally scared me, to the point where, I sort of redoubled my efforts. And out of sort of the ashes of Taylor Bridge and an immediately another fire that occurred almost in the same footprint that same year, Table Mountain, which, by the way, is on fire again right now. We were able to get 2 of the county commissioners. We have a county commissioner type government, 3 commissioners, so 2 makes a majority. We were able to get them to finally pass the WUI code. And that felt like a big victory to us. It felt like we had achieved something. But what I didn't anticipate was the pressure that developers and property owners would begin to put as soon as the memory of the fire sort of began to fade and we were focused on other things. The commissioners began to exert pressure on our fire code official in the county to relax and not fully implement the provisions of the WUI code. When we passed the WUI code, by the way, we were one of 4 counties in Washington state that had passed it. So we had inconsistent application and enforcement and really didn't get anywhere. In 2016, the county recognized this, and to their credit, they came back to the fire community and allowed us to make some modifications to the WUI code itself around intumescence and access and some vegetation management that just were the things that were the sticking points, but didn't seem to correlate to responder and public safety and ultimately to property loss. And so we made some updates to our version of the code, and we were able to get consistent application and enforcement of the WUI code in concert with the building code, in concert with the fire code. As we went into and came out of COVID, again, the pressure for economic development increased and the system began to sort of become under attack. But we've been able to maintain that. And I wanted to talk about a couple of other just sort of points that really we were able to resonate with the public, to some extent even the development community and elected officials. I already talked about that, asset versus liability. And who do you represent? Do you represent the developer and the person who might make another 3 or 4% on this transaction or this project? Or do you represent the voters, the people who will occupy these buildings, primarily single-family residences, for the duration of that building? And the elected officials moved on that. The concept that the insurance companies and the cost of ownership is a collective cost. And so what your neighbor does or what the people in your neighboring community do affects your ability to afford insurance and whether or not the insurance company will even maintain a presence in your region or in your state. And again, those are things that we're starting to see. California has been dealing with that for quite a while. We're just starting to see that in Washington state. And again, look at the actual risk that we're adding to our community. I served as a structural protection group supervisor on a large fire, Jolly Mountain, in 2017. And we had 3,100 homes that were at risk. And my plan, if the fire got established in any of these drainages or any of these communities, was quite literally to withdraw to a dry lake bed and let the fire burn through. And people didn't want to hear that, but that's the reality. We're not going to kill firefighters protecting property. And that's hard to do. There's an incentive for the firefighters to engage, and the risks are higher when there is a built environment. We already know that we're probably headed towards respirators for wildland fire under certain circumstances, i.e. we're in a WUI environment and we've mixed carcinogens into the wildland fire smoke. So our industry is changing, and I'm going to close out here by just talking about the increased risks that we're asking our structural firefighters to deal with, and the idea that we're putting them into a very dynamic environment, sometimes without adequate training, sometimes without adequate PPE and equipment. And recognizing that they're out of their element. And that is not a condemnation of their skill set. That's just a recognition that we need to broaden those skill sets, because increasingly communities are recognizing and dealing with these incidents, whether they be in, metro urban environments or, the traditional suburban or interface areas that we would normally recognize. So for the Wildland Fire Policy Committee, we're a very active committee. I would like to plug the WUI conference, which will be I haven't announced the dates firmly, but towards the end of March in Kansas City. We're trying to broaden our geographic footprint. We are focused right now on looking at like the NIST modeling and all of the heat release, and how do we actually make structures safer or more resistant to wildfire, and advocating for local communities with the insurance industry, and really trying to partner with the insurance industry in a way that sort of leverages the impact that we can have or influence that we can have on decision makers and even down to property owners. We're seeing, obviously, with the commission report and the infrastructure bill, literally $1 trillion being pushed into the cohesive strategy. And I guess what I would like to, just really emphasize is that, we're a few years into that and they're having trouble spending the money. There are landscape level treatments that need to be done on areas that are outside, sort of my constituency as an IAFC member. But really what this comes down to is we need to change the culture in our communities, and we do that at the local level. The federal government can't, the state land management agencies cannot do this. We are the advocates. We are the ones that can convince our community that, hey, at a parcel level, we need to create lower risk. We need to mitigate fuels. Otherwise, we're going to see, California and Texas size fires with those kinds of impacts, and we're all going to pay the bill, hopefully not with loss of life or serious injury. Again, I very much appreciate the high level of attendance and engagement in this webinar. And if there's anything that any of the audience members feels that the policy committee can do better or advocate for, please send us a message through the chat, and we will take that seriously, and we will pay attention to those comments. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rich. That was powerful. A lot wrapped into that too. Something that I took away that you said early on was how you had an incident and then how quickly, people forget about it, and people forget about what the risk possibly could be there in your community. And then in the end, you talked about how much we're asking for our firefighters, who are mostly trained in structural firefighting, to go out in these wildland environments. And of course, that's our number one priority, is keeping our firefighters safe. And I think a lot of times, personally, that our communities sometimes can have a false sense of safety. Of course, we know in the prevention world that everyone says it's not going to happen to me. And I can brag that for myself and my fire department, I know anytime we have an incident, our crews are going out there and they're doing awesome jobs at, taking care of these fires or hazmat situations or whatever it is. But and that might leave our community with a false sense of security that no matter what happens, the fire department's going to take care of it. And then sometimes we might get blindsided on a really dry time when we have some winds, like we've seen in areas all across the country now, not just out in California or down in Texas. So some great points there, Rich. I really appreciate that. And I hope everyone's enjoying the webinar so far. We're going to transition now to our last speaker from here in my state of Colorado. Let me do a quick bio here on Chief Chris Burnett. Chris has spent more than 20 years serving in various roles and capacities with a number of fire agencies, both as a volunteer and a career firefighter, and continues to volunteer for his local volunteer fire protection district today. Thank you for doing that, Chris. Always love my volunteer firefighters. That is how I got in the fire service myself. Chris joined the state of Colorado in January 2009. And his team was transferred to the newly formed Division of Fire Prevention and Control in the Fire and Life Safety section in 2013. With the Division of Fire Prevention and Control, he has filled various roles from Fire Inspector Unit Chief to Fire Plan Review Unit Chief, and is now leading the Section Chief. Chris holds a master's degree in organizational leadership and is credentialed as a certified fire marshal. In addition, he is the current chair of the International Code Council's IBC Egress Committee, a principal member of the International Code Council's 605 Multi-Hazard Resiliency and Residential Construction Standard Committee, that's a mouthful, for which he serves as the chair of the Building Design Requirements Task Group, and is the principal member of the NFPA Building, Fire, and Life Safety Directors and Hot Works Operations Committees. With that being said, I know Chris probably stays very busy with all that stuff. And so now I will turn it over to you, Chris, for your presentation, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Bernardchuk. It's so good to see you. It's good to see everybody on. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you're getting some stuff out of this. I know I am. I particularly want to speak to, well, I always like to hear Justice speak, but I also enjoyed hearing from Chief Elliott and his message about protecting our communities and our firefighters. And in order to do that, we really do need to start looking at mitigating the hazards. And that's not only mitigating the vegetation and managing the vegetation, but making sure that we're hardening structures. It takes both to really move the needle here. And that's what I want to talk about today. So we're going to spend the next bit of time diving into the International Code Council's International Wildland Urban Interface Code, the 2024 edition. My purpose here really isn't for you to leave and be expert practitioners at applying this code. We don't have enough time for that today, and that's not what I want to do here today. What I want to do is, oftentimes when I hear people talk about the IWIC, they talk about how it's complicated, and there seems to be this veil of mystery about it. And I want to lift that veil, and I want to show you that this really is a pretty adaptable code, and it's one that's easy to apply. And so I hope that you'll leave today knowing a little bit more about the IWIC and understand how it can be easily applied, but more importantly, how it's adaptable. When we talk about vegetation management and home structure hardening, there is this sliding scale, and the IWIC really adapts to that. It allows people to do a little bit less vegetation management if they harden their home a little more, or if they'd rather not harden their home or business, they can do more vegetation management, and this takes that into consideration. So I want to show you how that happens. A couple other things to talk about. This isn't a big code. It's 7 chapters, really. The last chapter, like all the ICC codes, is your referenced standards, so we won't really talk about that too much today. Also, the first and second chapters are just like the other codes in the ICC catalog. The first chapter is your scope and administration, really talks about application of the code and permitting and so forth. We aren't really going to get into that today either. Then chapter 2 is our definitions. So we'll cite some definitions as we go through this, but really I'm going to be focusing on chapters 3 through 6. And so you're going to see me jump right into that as we get going here. But first, just want to tell you a little bit about my agency in case you're wondering. So the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control is the state of Colorado's state fire agency. We do everything from train firefighters to work on technical advancements for firefighting, and then we help with wildfire mitigation, management, and suppression. And then there's my section, the Fire and Life Safety section, and we really concentrate on the application of codes and standards, particularly the building, fire, and life safety codes in certain regulated facilities throughout Colorado. We also help local jurisdictions with their origin and cause fire investigations, as well as community risk reduction initiatives. So it's a little bit about us. Chief Bernardchuk gave me a great introduction. I'm not going to go over who I am again, but I do feel like I need to give you some disclaimers. As you heard, I participate on quite a few code and standards committees, both with ICC and NFPA. And I just need to say that I'm not representing either of those organizations today. The opinions you're going to hear from me are my opinions alone. They don't represent any of the committees that I'm on. I also want to say that I represent NASFM, the National Association of State Fire Marshals, on the IBC Egress Committee. And again, not representing them here today, but I think that everything that I'll share with you aligns well with their mission and values. So with that, I will dive in here and hopefully you just get to learn a little bit more about the International Wildland Urban Interface Code and go away feeling like it's something that maybe that would help your communities out in this endeavor to reduce these risks that we're facing more and more with the wildland urban interface. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit just to start about the Wildland Urban Interface Code. So this is not just a residential code. This is meant to be enforceable for commercial, residential, industrial, and just about anything else you can think of. So when you hear the IWOOC, don't think just residential. This really applies to all the building in your jurisdictions. It's fully compatible with all the I codes. The I codes should be used as a catalog, as a library. So the intent here is that it supplements what you're already doing out of the IBC, the IRC, the IEBC, anything else, the property maintenance code. This should supplement that and work in conjunction with it. However, I will say, if need be, you can apply the IWOOC in and of itself. It's just really meant to be applied with the other library codes. Uses globally recognized standards. And then there's several items that are covered in this code, and we're going to go over these. And I'm going to try and stay at a high level. Again, I don't intend for you to go home and be able to apply this to your communities right away. I just want you to understand what it is and how you might be able to apply it to your communities. So as we get into this, you're going to see that it talks about ignition resistant construction. It talks about defensible space, because again, you need to talk about both as you work into this arena. It does talk about emergency vehicle access and water supply, and there are some requirements in there about fire sprinklers, and we will get into that a little bit later. So with that, the provisions within this code are interdependent. It means that they're going to rely on one another, but the consistent application of this is going to help out throughout your communities. So it's not going to just help out at the parcel level. If you apply it throughout your community, it's going to help out the parcel level, the neighborhood level, and the community level. Again, I can't stress enough that the IWOOC is a flexible code. It works on this kind of sliding scale where you're able to adapt to the needs of the builder. And that way, it's not just one size fits all. Sometimes when we think about WUI codes, we think about the concrete bunker in the middle of the forest, and that's not this. This really does allow you to adapt, use alternative methods to make sure that you're meeting the needs of your community. And so, again, it takes into account several things, several factors: critical fire weather, it takes into account slope, takes into account the vegetation and what types of vegetation and how much vegetation that you'd like to keep on that parcel. And so keep that in mind as we go into this, but it truly is a systems-based approach. So I want to just talk, I know I said I wouldn't talk about chapter 1, but I do think it's important to talk about a couple of things out of there. Most importantly, the scope of this. And so the scope of this code is really meant to apply to not only construction, new construction, but also there are provisions for the alteration, maintenance, addition to existing structures, as well as the movement of structures into your wildland urban interface. So that's something to think about. Is we do have manufactured buildings that are built in one place and moved to another, and so we have to consider that if we move something into the wildland urban interface, what do we do with that? So your wildland urban interface area, this is a definition out of chapter 2. Pretty basic. And what's going on here is it sets this broad definition of what the wildland urban interface is. Then the scope and administration will tell you how you're going to apply it. And then you look through the code and it will show you how to apply this code within the wildland urban interface. So just real quickly, wildland urban interface, as it pertains to this code, is that geographical area where structures and other human development meets or intermingles with wildland or vegetative fuels. We need to talk about how much wildland urban interface is growing in the United States. So this is information from the U.S. Fire Administration. Right now, we have more than 46 million residences and 70,000 communities in the wildland urban interface in the United States. And that continues to grow by 2 million acres each year. So that doesn't mean that our wildland is growing by 2 million acres each year. It is that we're choosing to move into the wildland. We're choosing to create a WUI. We're taking what is wildland and we are moving structures into it every year. So there is some growth occurring, but for the most part, this is because we are choosing to move into it. That is our culture. People in the United States want to live in these areas, and rightfully so. They're beautiful areas, but we have to start looking at the risks involved. And so the application of the Wildland Urban Interface Code can help us to do that. So based on that definition I just gave you, again, the definition is that geographical area where structures and other human development meets or intermingles with wildland or vegetative fuels. Those things on your screen now, is that WUI? I think a lot of the times we think of WUI as those areas kind of like the one in the upper left-hand corner. You got the cabin in the woods. That's our WUI. Not necessarily. If you look at that definition and you look at everything on your screen right now, I would contend that everything on your screen there is WUI. And so we need to start thinking about how the effect of having human construction, human development in those areas is going to affect the overall community. So again, my idea is that every one of those is WUI, especially based on that definition. So now is where we're going to jump into the code and kind of how you apply it. And I'm just going to go through chapters 3 through 6 pretty quickly here. But chapter 3 is a very, very small chapter. I think it's got about 4 sections in it, but they're very dense sections, and they really set you up in your jurisdiction to apply the rest of the code. So the big thing is in chapter 3 in section 302 does say that you as the AHJ need to declare where the wildland urban interface areas are within your jurisdiction. So, and not only do you have to declare it, but you have to do it based on fact. And they want you to correspond it to natural or man-made features. So if you have a major road running through your jurisdiction, that could be your starting point. But you have to somehow show on a map where your wildland urban interface areas are. And that's just to be fair to who you're applying this code to. They need to know that if they're moving into that jurisdiction, that they are moving into a wildland urban interface area as designated by you and your organization. So you have to have it on a map. Those maps have to be made public so people can see them, view them, know what they're getting into. And then you have to reevaluate that. And it does say you should have to reevaluate it at least every 3 years. So you should be going back. And we all know that the wildland urban interface changes, not only because of human development, but because of growth. And so it's going to change over time. And so you need to make sure that you're updating these for your constituents. So how do you do that? Well, if you just get online and you Google wildland urban interface, there are so many resources out there that you're able to use. It's hard to choose, but there are some good ones. For Colorado, our Colorado State Forest Service has a great map that we can refer to, and I use that all the time, especially where we apply this code with the state of Colorado. But also the National Forest Service has resources, FEMA has resources, but there are some other resources out there that are pretty good too, USDA. So I think everybody's going to get a copy of this presentation. You can go to those websites, take a look at where they're designating the wildland urban interface throughout the country. But just find the one that works best for you and for your jurisdiction, I think, is the best way to go. You can do it yourself. You can go out and you can look at the vegetation, the slope, the critical fire weather, and the structures, and you can decide to map it yourselves. But at least for me, and again, I'm coming to you as a practitioner. I am not on the WUI code committee. I'm coming to you as somebody who uses the WUI code. And for me, the best way to do this was to find an online resource that already exists that seemed to align pretty well with where we believe the wildland urban interface to be, and use those resources. So Whatever works best for you, of course, is what you should go with. So that's really the bulk of Chapter 3. Again, we're moving pretty quickly. Chapter 4, you start to get into the wildland-urban interface requirements. So this is where we get into access and water sources. So we'll move kind of quick through this, but there are some highlights that I want you all to know about. So it does talk about fire service access roads and how they need to be protected. One of the big things in the Wildland Urban Interface Code that I think is necessary is that it does talk about identification, not only of premise, but also of roads and any fire service equipment that might be available in that community. So you're going to see a lot of things about identification signs. The other thing is if you have gated roadways, there needs to be a way for the fire department to access those. And so it talks a little bit about the key boxes for access. And then it talks a lot about water supplies, and that gets into the later chapters. So keep that in mind. We'll talk a little bit about water supplies, and that will actually go into Chapter 5 and how you actually apply this and what the construction requirements are that we get into. We talked about the fire department access, but also then there is a little section at the end of Chapter 4 about having fire protection plans. And really what it is, it's talking about everything that's in this code. How is the fire department going to access the property? What are the water sources nearby? What is the overall community plan for the wildland urban interface? So just getting into quickly the water supply requirements. And again, I'm just going to go over this very quickly. The big thing here is that there are water supply requirements in Section 404 that have to be met for all structures in the wildland urban interface. And these are in addition to what's already in the IFC. So again, it's meant to build upon what's already been set up from the IFC, the International Fire Code, but this is in addition to. So now you're going to see this later on, so it might not make a lot of sense now, but those water source requirements are a requirement for all structures unless you choose not to meet the water supply requirements for your construction requirements. And that's going to make a whole lot more sense as we get into Chapter 5. But just know that it says that you need to have the water, but there is a way that, especially in those communities, a lot of these communities can't meet the water source requirements. And so again, it's adjustable, it's accommodating. And so you're going to see that in Chapter 5, we're able to accommodate those communities and those buildings where maybe you can't meet the water supply requirements. The other thing is the water supply requirements don't apply to private garages, carport sheds, and those agricultural buildings that are under 600 square feet. So again, for all new subdivision, there's going to be water supply requirements in individual structures if you're wanting to meet the conforming water supply requirements of the IWWIC. Again, we're going to go over that later. Something to keep in mind, that these water supply requirements are not just to protect the fire getting to a building from the wildland, but also we need to think about if we have a fire start in a structure, it's to our advantage to stop that fire before it reaches the wildland. And so a lot of the water supply requirements are for trying to stop a structure fire from becoming a wildland fire. So I hear that comment often that maybe we shouldn't have water supply requirements in a WUI code. But again, if we can stop a structure fire from getting into the WUI and causing the wildland fire, then we're all better off. And so I would argue there is good reason for having these water supply requirements within the Wildland Urban Interface Code. What is an adequate water supply? I'm not going to go through the calculations with you. I just wanted you to see that there are two different calculations, one for 1 and 2 family dwellings, and then there's one for other than 1 and 2 family dwellings. Big thing is it's a pretty big difference between the two. 1 and 2 family dwellings is dependent on square footage. A lot of the buildings that we have, anything under 3,600 square feet is going to require 1,000 gallons per minute for a minimum of 30 minutes. So we're talking 30,000 gallons there. Bumps up a little bit if you get over, a bigger home that's over 3,600 square feet. But there are some pretty substantial increases if you have a building that's something other than a 1 or 2 family dwelling. Now you're talking about pretty big water, 1,500 gallons per minute for a duration of 2 hours. And so we're talking pretty big water there. Now, in both cases, there's opportunity to reduce it by adding a sprinkler system. But with buildings other than 1 and 2 family dwellings, at no point are you dropping it below the 1,500 gallons per minute for the duration. So it's pretty big water. And that's why I think it's important to understand that this code's pretty adaptable. If you're not able to meet the water supply requirements, then there are other ways to meet the code requirements. So that's chapter 4. Chapter 5 is really where we get into the construction provisions of this code. And this is where you're going to really start to see how adaptable this code is. Again, I can't stress enough that these requirements are meant to supplement the requirements out of the International Building Code and the International Residential Code. They're meant to work in conjunction with each other. There are things in this code that aren't addressed in IBC or IRC, but there are also things in the IBC and the IRC that certainly aren't addressed in this code. So this is supposed to supplement those. So I'm going to walk you through how you apply this code, and it's 6 pretty easy steps. So the first thing you have to do as you get into chapter 5 is you have to determine the critical fire weather frequency in your area. In Colorado, that's pretty easy. What we do is we just go by red flag days. And so red flag days are those days where you're going to see potential for extreme fire behavior in the wildland. And it's going to be based on relative humidity, winds, unstable air, and drought type conditions. So if you have critical fire weather for 1 day or less in your area, that's one. The second level is if you have critical fire weather for 2 to 7 days in your area. And if you have critical fire weather for 8 days or more in your area, then you meet that third tier. Okay, so keep that in mind. There's 3 different tiers here. The first is 1 day or less. Next is 2 to 7 days, and the third is 8 days or more. I will tell you in Colorado, in most cases, we're going to have 8 days or more wherever you're at of critical fire weather. If we get red flag days quite often here. And so in most cases, we're going to have critical fire weather frequency of that highest tier. But that's probably the easiest way to go is just look for red flag warnings in your area. And if you get, fall into any one of those 3 categories, then you know where you fall. There are some resources there that you can go and look these up on, but we won't get too much into that. So that's step 1, determining what your critical fire weather frequency is. Then you got to determine the slope of your building site. So if it's 40% or less, between 41 and 60% slope, or greater than 61% slope, those are your 3 tiers. So this is getting into, we all know that fire travels quicker on a slope. If you have that slope that's less than 40, it's not as much of a concern as that slope that's 61% or greater. So that's step 2. Step 3 is determining your fuel models. So you can go to Appendix D in the IWOIC, and it will outline several different fuel models. So the three basics that we're going to use in this code are light fuels, medium fuels, and heavy fuels. And so you can see there that those are just the quick definitions of those codes, or of those fuel models. So a light fuel is going to be that vegetation that's a 1/4 inch or less in diameter. Your medium fuels are 1/4 inch to 3 inches, and then your heavy fuels are going to be anything more than that. But really, I would suggest you go to Appendix D and look at the fuel models in Appendix D, because it will really help you hone in on what vegetation you have in your area to apply it here. But these are the 3 steps that you're going to apply to the table in Chapter 5. So this is table 502.1, and this is how you're going to determine your fire hazard severity. And so you just plug it all in. And so this is step 4 of 6. So we're getting there pretty quickly. So you're going to go from the top down here. You're going to, the first column there is looking at your different, or the 3 columns are your different critical fire weather frequencies. Okay. So we talked about that. You've decided, let's just say for Colorado, in most cases, we're going to be 8 days or more. So we're going to be working in that last column, the column to the most right. Okay. And then from there, you look at your slope, and you've determined your slope. So whatever your slope is, you're going to work in that sub column there. So let's say your slope is less than 40. So we'll be working in that left-hand column of the right-hand main column. Okay. And then you'll look, your rows are your fuel models. And so you've determined what your fuel model is, and you're just going to carry that over. So let's say that we have more than 8 days of critical fire weather. We have a slope of less than 40%. And let's say we're looking at heavy fuels. So if you follow that down, it is an E, which is an extreme fire hazard. Okay. So you've determined in 3 simple steps what your fire hazard severity is. Again, it's based on slope, fire weather, and your fuels. Okay, going from there, remember what your fire hazard severity is. Next thing is this is where we talked about the water supply. Is your water supply conforming or non-conforming? So just 2 decision points there. Either you're conforming or not. Are you able to meet those water supply requirements? If you aren't able to meet it, then you're non-conforming. If you are, you're conforming. Pretty simple. So the next thing is, and we will get into defensible space in Chapter 6, but the last thing you have to decide is your defensible space conforming or non-conforming to the defensible space requirements in 603. There's an added bonus here. If you can meet the defensible space requirements by 1.5 times at least, then you get an extra bump. And so there's actually 3 categories here. You've got conforming, non-conforming, and that extra bump of at least.
Everyone, if we'll just stand by for a minute while we have some technical issues here. We've somehow lost Chief Burnett. But I'll jump in and just cover while we work on getting him back up. Oh, there you are.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's try and get through this together then. So the platform is probably sick of hearing from me, just like everybody else. So I'll try and speed this up and get you all through this. But I hope you're learning something. We are at step 6 of applying chapter 5 of the IWIC. So the last thing you need to do is just determine if you're conforming to the defensible space requirements. So again, there's 3 different categories here: conforming, non-conforming, or 1.5 times. If you can meet 1.5 times what the requirements are, then you get that special bump. Okay. And so we are going to apply this to the last table here. So this is table 503 out of chapter 5. And so remember, we have already determined your fire hazard severity. Okay. And so that's where you start at the columns. You go to whatever fire hazard severity that you landed on for your area, or what we just decided, right? It's going to be based on slope, fuels, and critical fire weather. And then from there, you decide whether or not you're meeting the water supply requirements. So conforming or non-conforming will put you into one of those 2 sub-columns. And then you're going to go over and look at the rows, and the rows are your conforming, non-conforming, or 1.5 times conforming defensible space. So if you remember, with our first scenario, we decided that we were an extreme hazard. So that puts us in the last 2 columns on the right side of this table. And then let's say that we aren't able to meet the water supply requirements. So that puts us in the non-conforming column. And then we look at defensible space, and let's say that we're able to meet a 1.5 times conforming. So if you follow that over, it tells you it's IR1. That's ignition resistant construction 1. And so that tells you what you have to build your structure to based on the requirements of this code. And so we'll get into what those requirements are. But it's really that easy. It's those, I said 6 steps, but technically when you plug it into this, it's 7 steps to determine what construction requirements you're going to meet. Okay. So real quick, I just want to do a quick scenario and apply this again. So let's just take a look at this example property. We have a subject property that's here in Colorado. It's surrounded by mature trees on a gentle grade, and the only source of water on the property is a residential well, and it's located in an area without fire hydrants. So that tells you that it's on a gentle grade, so it's probably that 40% or less. It's got mature trees, so probably in those heavy fuels. It doesn't sound like it's going to meet the water supply requirements. We know it's in Colorado, so I've told you that in Colorado, in most cases, we're going to have more than 8 days of critical fire weather. So let's just go back a couple of slides here and apply this. So here's the first table we talked about. So we know that we're going to be working in the last 3 columns, the columns to the right, because we have over 8 days of that critical fire weather. Then we know that the slope is 40 or less, so it's going to be in that first sub-column. And then we know that it's that heavy fuels. And so if you follow that over, we are an extreme hazard. Okay, so let's then go to the next table, 503.1. We know that we're in an extreme hazard. We talked about not being able to meet conform to the water supply requirements. So we are in the very last column on this table. And when you guys looked at the picture of that property, would you say that there's much defensible space there? I will say that the trees are right up against and surrounding that building. And so I would say that we probably are not conforming to the defensible space requirements. I know we haven't talked about those yet, but let's just go with that. So if it's non-conforming defensible space, and we don't have the water supply requirements, and we're an extreme hazard, if you take a look at that, we're actually not permitted to build in this area right now because there's just too much to offset, too big of a hazard to offset. We have heavy fuels, we have critical fire weather, we don't have water supply, we don't have any type of defensible space. Now, that doesn't mean that all bets are off. That just means that currently, as set up, we really shouldn't build on this property. However, if we go back to chapter 6 and we're able to meet the defensible space requirements, well, now it can bump you to ignition resistant class 1 NC. And so NC stands for non-combustible. We'll get into that. But if you take it even further and you're able to meet the defensible space requirements 1.5 times, then it'll drop you down to just ignition resistant construction. So see how this is adaptable? We started out by saying, no, you can't build here because of all this. But if you're willing to increase your defensible space, then yeah, now we can work with you and we can start to come up with the construction requirements for your home or building. The other thing, if you're able to now conform to the water supply requirements. So let's say that, you know what, I like how the property's set up. I really don't want to cut down a lot of the trees, but I am willing to put in a 30,000 gallon water supply. Oh, look, if you're willing to do that, it'll bump you into that conforming column. And now you can build it to ignition resistant class 1 non-combustible. And so this is adaptable. If you're wanting to do both, if you can meet the water supply requirements and do 1.5 times conforming for defensible space, it bumps you all the way down to ignition resistant construction class 2. So again, I can't stress enough that this code is very adaptable. It can meet the requirements of different areas. Okay. So I'm going to walk through what ignition resistant construction class means very quickly here. The important things to acknowledge is that it addresses different elements of construction for the structure. So it addresses roof assemblies, roof valleys, protecting the eaves, the gutters and downspouts, exterior wall construction. There's 5 different options for exterior wall construction when you get into class 1 ignition resistant construction. Underfloor enclosures, appendages and projections, exterior glazing, exterior doors, and vents. So it's all those elements of construction where we know we need to have some heightened level of resistance to fire because of the exposure to a wildland fire. So right here on your screen, this is that class 1 ignition resistant construction. It is that highest level of construction. So you're going to see that it's going with quite a bit of pretty high requirements. So class A rating on your roofs, the valleys need to be corrosion resistant material that's metal. Your gutters and downspouts need to be non-combustible and have to have a way to prevent the accumulation of debris that, as Chief Benarchek pointed out, that accumulation of debris is very susceptible to embers. And so we need to have some way to make sure that that doesn't happen for both in gutters and your underfloor areas. Exterior walls are going to be important, especially in this level of construction, because we might have some direct flame impingement. And so we're going to build those exterior walls to pretty high requirements. Same thing with the opening protections, your doors, your windows, and your vents. And so one thing that those of you who are used to applying the 2021 edition of the IWUIC, the 2024 did change your vents. So now it really gets into performance or prescriptive requirements for vents in the 2024 edition. That was one of the big changes for this edition of the code. So again, won't go into too much more detail on that. I just want you to know that class 1 ignition resistant construction is the highest level of construction. Here are the 5 different options for exterior walls. I'm not going to go through this with you. I just want you to recognize that there are options for exterior wall construction, even in this highest level of construction. You'll see that number 3 there is heavy timber log wall construction. We know that a lot of people who move into the wildland urban interface like that type of construction, so it's accounted for here. But there are 4 other options there for somebody who's building a home or a commercial property to choose from. Okay, the other note I need to make is I talked about how it says there are 3 levels of construction, but really there's 4 levels, because we have this class 1 ignition resistant construction NC, which is that non-combustible. And really what that's saying is when you get into class 1 ignition resistant construction and have that NC requirement, the exterior walls are going to be limited to minimum 1 hour fire resistant rated walls, and the exterior surfaces have to be non-combustible. Still, log wall construction is allowed in this scenario. So that's the big thing, though, is you have to watch out for that little NC note, because it's going to bump you up to this requirement where your exterior walls have to be non-combustible. Class 2 ignition resistant construction, when you first take a look at it, you're going to see that it's not very different from class 1 ignition resistant construction. It's actually pretty much the same requirements except for the protection of eaves. So if I back up just one slide here, or 2 slides, the protection, 3 slides, the protection of eaves is not less than 1 hour fire resistance rated construction on the exposed undersides of eaves for class 1 ignition resistant construction. For class 2, it changes that they just have to be enclosed with solid material with a minimum thickness of 3/4 of an inch. At first glance, that appears to be the only difference between class 1 and class 2 ignition resistant construction. Doesn't seem like much, and it's not going to seem like much until we get into chapter 6. So just bear with me here. You're going to see one big difference between class 1 and class 2 ignition resistant construction, but for some reason it was popped in chapter 6, not into chapter 5. So keep that in mind, and we'll get there in just a second. The last class, lowest level of construction requirements, is class 3 ignition resistant construction. So this is that drop down. This is really meant to be, I believe, ember resistant construction. You've met water supply requirements. You're on a gentle slope. You don't have heavy fuels. Maybe your critical fire weather isn't that high. So really what it's doing is it's taken into account ember protection. We can drop down to a class B rating on your roofs. Valleys still need to be protected because we know that's where we like to accumulate debris. Again, gutters and downspouts don't change much because that's a big culprit in wildland fire for the accumulation of debris and starting fires, not only from direct flame impingement and radiant heat, but from embers. And so we want to protect the gutters. And so that means we're still non-combustible materials, and we're trying to eliminate the accumulation of debris in those. Again, trying to eliminate the accumulation of debris under floors. And so those are enclosed. And then we have vent requirements here as well. So here it kind of drops away from the prescriptive and the 2 different types of vent requirements, and just goes with one prescriptive requirement that says they have to be less than 144 square inches and covered in non-combustible and corrosion resistant mesh, and the openings have to be no more than 1/8 of an inch. So that's your 3 classes of construction. The last thing before we move on to chapter 6 is chapter 5 does address replacement of roof. So we know that roof coverings can be a problem in the wildland urban interface. And so if you're going to replace your roof in a 12-month period, you replace more than 25% of your roof, then it has to meet the requirements of the applicable construction requirements within chapter 5. So if somebody in your jurisdiction is going to replace their roof and it's more than 25% of it in that 12-month period, then you're going to have to figure out what ignition resistant construction requirements apply, and that's the type of roof that they'll have to go with. So in a ignition resistant class 3, they can do a B or better. Anything else, they're going to have to go with a class A roof. Getting into chapter 6, bear with me, we're almost done here, and then we can open it up for questions, and hopefully you've got some good questions for not only me, but Chief Elliott and Justice. But chapter 6 This is really talking about the maintenance requirements. So the provisions of this chapter apply to both new and existing buildings and structures, okay? So keep that in mind. This is really talking about the vegetation management, maintaining the parcel that you're located on. And so, but the very first thing out of the gate, you get to chapter 6 is section 602. And this is what I was talking about with ignition resistant construction class 1. Section 602 says that if you're ignition resistant construction class 1, if you have to meet those requirements, you're going to be sprinkler protected. So that's the big difference between ignition resistant class 1 and class 2. So again, underneath protection is a difference, but the big one is if you have to meet the requirements of class 1 ignition resistant construction, you have to sprinkler. So now we get into the defensible space requirements, and I'm going to go over these pretty quickly here. But I just want you to be aware that this is where, when we talk about conforming and non-conforming defensible space requirements, this is what you're going to refer to. So 603.2 is talking about your fuel modification. And so remember, if you are in in that interface area that's a moderate hazard, we decided what level of hazard that the parcel is going to be in. So if you're moderate hazard, high hazard, or extreme hazard, there's going to be different fuel modification distances. So for moderate hazard, it's 30 feet. For high hazard, it's 50 feet. And for extreme hazard, it's 100 feet. So that's what you're going to refer to. If you can meet those defensible space requirements for those distances based on your hazard severity, then you can be conforming. And if you need to meet that conforming 1.5 times, then you got to take that amount and do 1.5 times. So there is that option. Now, defensible space, I think there are some misconceptions about that sometimes, that people often think, oh, that just means moonscaping my property, that I need to take everything down to bare earth and just have rocks and dirt and have nothing else. Not necessarily. The Chapter 6 really gets into what you can and can't do. Before I get into that, I just wanted to share this with you. So when you're talking about those distances for defensible space, it's not going to be just the ground walked to get to that. It's going to be the horizontal plane from the perimeter of the projections on the building. And so when we talk about 100 feet out, it's truly 100 feet out, not just walking 100 feet, but you got to do it on the grade plane. And so this is your distances specified. The code does allow for the code official to increase those distances if they feel like it's necessary, and it's going to be based on the fire protection plan that we talked about in chapter 4. So just a couple of quick notes. So I was talking about how defensible space doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be moonscaped. That's not true. You can have trees in your defensible space. There's just requirements that you have to meet with those trees. So really, you have to have no unmodified fuels within 10 feet of the crown of the tree. You have to limb up your trees up to 6 feet from the ground. There's different things that you can do, but you can still have trees in that defensible space. They just can't become a significant fuel source and one that's easily ignited. You got to cut out all the dead limbs out of it, make sure that debris isn't accumulating in your trees as well. So something to keep in mind, that you can still have trees, you just have to take care of them. You can also have the ornamental ground vegetation. The big thing here is you just don't want a path for fire to be able to be transmitted to the structure. And so you don't want those ladder fuels within your defensible space. So I didn't go into everything in chapter 6, but take a look at it. It doesn't mean moonscaping your property. It just means mitigating the hazards that are potentially on there. So we talked a little bit about this, pruning your trees, making sure that you've limbed them up to 6 feet. The big thing is make sure that you're removing all the leaves, needles, and other dead things from your gutters, from your roof valleys. You don't want to pile your lumber right next to your house. So those are all things that you need to think about and be able to educate building and homeowners on. We're almost done here, folks. There's just one more thing I want you to be aware of. There are some retroactive requirements in the Wildland Urban Interface Code, and I think everybody should be aware of these. I talked a little bit about marking. So address markers. If you adopt this, it's not just for new construction. The way that this code reads is that all buildings have to be provided with address markers. So even those existing buildings need to go back and do markings. Roads, same thing. Fire protection equipment, same thing. All three of those, they have to have markings. The other thing is when you adopt this code, all chimneys, new or existing, have to have the spark arresters. And that's in chapter 6. So that's all chimneys, not just new chimneys. And then again, talked about firewood and other combustible material. You don't want those stacked right up against your homes or businesses. And so that's something that you'd have to be cognizant of, is that applies to all structures in your jurisdiction, not just new ones. So with that is my very quick overview of the IWOIC. I hope that it's removed some of the mystery to it. It really is an adaptable code. It is a way that you and your communities can start to think about how you can start to reduce these risks, not only in vegetation, but in the built environment, and start to bring down the cases of us losing homes in wildland urban interface. So with that, thanks for your time. Happy to answer questions, I think, here soon.
Thank you, Chief. I'd ask Chief Bednarik to come back on, and I think we have a few questions that we'd like to bring in and our other presenters. So I think this has been a great learning presentation for all of us, and I think it's a great new area for a lot of people in the rest of the United States that may not be dealing with this at the same level. So a few of the earlier questions that we had pop in that have popped up a couple times were about the facts related to justification for the 1 mile ember resistant threshold. So I think that's how that was determined and how that came about. So Justice, I know that was during your presentation. If you could kind of give us a little more in-depth thought on that.
Certainly, that came about and it's reinforced in 2 separate ways. One, real-world observations of fire behavior in our environment and documented spotting potential, and robust risk modeling that also illustrated the potential for spotting at a distance of 1.5 miles. So we use the experience from our local firefighters and other first responders, coupled with that modeling, to dial that in to make sure that was going to be an effective protection measure.
So real-time modeling then came into play to make that determination.
Yeah, fire behavior modeling to understand potential ember sources and ember receptive beds, and so where could embers come from and land and be viable was part of that modeling, and then observations by our firefighters in the field.
Oh, excellent. Any of the other presenters have any thoughts on that use? Great. So the next, this is a comment that came in, which I think is sort of interesting on the research question about respirators. So Chief Elliott, I know that kind of came in under yours, and there's been some comments traded back and forth from Cal Fire Safety. So thanks for putting that in there. But I think this is another evolution of health and safety, and exactly, DH&S S&T is working on that, and any thoughts on how other can get involved with that?
Yeah, so right now, I guess I'll start kind of from the top. OSHA is undergoing a fairly significant review of their fire brigade standard, And one of the OSHA standards that they are, or excuse me, one of the NFPA standards that they're looking at making required, effectively law, is on the wildland fire respirators. It's under the PPE standard. And so we've been participating in that process. And I'll tell you from the fire chief's perspective, we get it. We get it that wildland firefighters, particularly in suburban and urban environments, routinely are exposed to products of combustion that are not just, organic material. And but what we're looking for and what we're advocating for is that OSHA maybe phase in that standard to allow the industry to catch up with products that are, reasonably priced, but even more important, functional and safe. And we don't feel like that industry has really arrived at that spot yet, and nor do we believe there is a model out there that effectively tells firefighters and supervisors at fires as to when those respirators should be put on and when they can be taken off, because it's not our position that we feel that all firefighters should have respirators on all the time. So, and I if I threw that out there and kind of got everybody's attention, the conversations are occurring. I believe, in the next decade, you will see some sort of requirement for wildland fire respirators, but those decisions actually haven't been formally made. So I could be wrong. There just seems to be a lot of research and a lot of reasons why this is a good idea if it's done correctly, and B, something that we're just going to have to accept as part of what we're doing. And again, from a firefighter safety perspective, very much needed.
No, thank you. Any other thoughts from any other presenters on that? So being involved in research for IFC, I think that's one of the areas that, again, that is critical, is that we're, always looking out to see what those research areas are and how best we can share that back with the fire service. And it's something that we here at IFC will continue to do. So we have a great question here for Chris, actually, and about adopting of the code. And do you foresee any, newer communities coming on board, and especially, well, even Justice, a little bit about the expectations of adoption?
Sorry, Chief Miller, can you repeat the question there?
So are jurisdictions adopting, to the code, and then, where do you, looking out in advance, do you see any expectations from the community, from the building community? I know I've seen a lot of blog posts about the recent vent requirements from the construction industry. So to me, that's an education piece that, we need to let them know why that's there and what's going on and stuff, and those kind of expectations.
Yeah, so I think that when we are seeing adoption of the IWOC, and this has just been my experience, is that there has been a lot of amendment to it. I know I spent a little bit of time on the water supply requirements, and those are some requirements that a lot of jurisdictions are having trouble meeting. But as you saw with IWOC, a lot of the requirements as you get into Chapter 5 are directly related to those water supply requirements. So as you amend those requirements out, then you have to adapt for not having those anymore. And so I think it becomes this pretty extensive amended adoption. And so, the big thing is you need to be able to adopt it for how it's going to work for your community. And so I know that they're taking that into consideration when they do that. I like your comment about education, and that's what we're trying to do here today, right? I think so much of what it is the IWOC is a newer code. We've had the building codes and the fire codes for so long, and now this new code has entered into the arena, and there's a lot of unknowns to it, right? I've had people tell me, is it building code or is it a fire code? And my answer is always, well, actually, it's the Wildland Urban Interface Code. And it even says in the scope and administration opening chapters that you will have a wildland urban interface code official. So just like you have a building code official, just like you have a fire code official, you will have an IWOIC official. And it could be one of those other two, whatever works best for your communities. But it's just one of those things, those added elements that it's like, I don't think people are quite sure yet how to apply it and who should be applying it. So there's those things that we have to figure out for our communities. I hope that answered the question.
No, I think you're right on point. Being an East Coaster, retired fire captain, by the way, you guys keep referring to me as chief, but just retired guy. It's interesting following this, and the terminology, and it's new. So educating the current workforce, and then the new workforce, and then the general public of understanding what these terms are and how best we can drive that risk reduction messaging. I think is critical. So we had a great question come in about the advantages and disadvantages of the two codes of ICC and NFPA. And so sort of maybe Chris, I'll start with you and your thoughts on, how we meld in the NFPA standard compared to the ICC code.
And there, I think you hit it on the head. I think the IWOIC is a code, whereas 1142 is a standard. And so the IWOIC has really been set up to be applied as a code. So if you think about it, a code is kind of says what the requirements are, and a standard will say how will they be applied. Is kind of the two ways to think about that. And so it's not to say that you cannot apply the 1142 as you would the IWOIC. You're just going to have to do some work there. The standard's not going to have the scope and administration chapters that kind of show you how to apply the code, what your permitting requirements are, those types of things. It really just gets right into what does it look like when we do build in the wildland urban interface, and what are those requirements. So you really have to think about what that application requirements are going to be in the standard, when in the code they're already provided there for you. So that's, for me, that's the two biggest differences. But I do think both have a lot of benefits. There's good stuff in both of them. And I do think as we continue to develop both, they're going to come to the same kind of requirements, because we are recognizing that there are three modes of heat transfer that we have to think of when we're working towards this. That's the ember resistance, or the transmission of heat through embers, transmission through radiant heat, and then direct flame impingement. And as we start to think in those terms, I think a lot of these requirements are going to start to line up, whether we're in the ICC code or in the NFPA standards.
No, great. That kind of, I think, just answered another question on embers and radiant heat and other areas that was put forth. So thank you for jumping in that. So we have another question, and this may, Justice, you may be able to look at this a little bit, since you've just went through the code adoption. Is how are authorities having jurisdiction measuring the 1.5D space? So Chris, over to you, I think, on the technical side, for reduction of ignition resistant construction. Is it for the nearest exposure or something else? So how do you determine that? And then, I think, Justice, with your practical experience, or Chris, with the technical, how best should we look at that question? What do I as a fire official have to do to look at that? What are those determining factors?
I'll let Chief Burnett go first, because he's more likely to answer it completely.
Okay, and I try and not talk too code geeky, but really it's that tabular distance from the perimeter or the projection of the structure that you are trying to protect, to the point where you're no longer modifying the vegetation on the property. And so in Chapter 6, it's got those defensible space requirements of how you're going to modify the vegetation. So it's at the point where you stop modifying vegetation back to the projection, the closest projection or perimeter of the building. And again, that's tabular distance. So that's not going to be you walking out 100 feet or you walking out 150 feet. You're going to have to take the angle and do a right angle out, and it's actually going to be a little further out if you're on a slope than it would be if you were just to walk it out. I hope that makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
I think that answer. Go ahead, Justice.
I was just going to say, we took a little bit of different approach in our application, and we're taking a phased approach. Our goal is get a code in place and then improve upon that code. So initially, we decided against a defensible space criteria. We didn't want that to be a loophole for people to do defensible space in lieu of structure hardening. We want structure hardening to be preeminent. And so we factored our structure hardening based on proximity to wildland fuels or areas of wildland fuel, regardless of defensible space, with educational recommendations on creating that defensible space. Moving forward, we're pushing to add a 0 to 5 non-combustible zone around all structures built in the WUI. So kind of taking that incremental approach, but we wanted to put structure hardening first and not allow for vegetation management to be a replacement for that best practice.
Yeah, great practical experience. So I have a good question that kind of goes to everybody's area here that we've talked through today is how much research and studies have really went into the wildfire's influence within the code development, and what are the resources that we use and ICC uses to help develop this code?
So
Go ahead.
Oh, Chief Elliott, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say through the policy committee, we have been engaged through some university level research out of Southern California and, of course, out of Montana. And NIST is looking at this, and more holistically, the insurance industry is very clearly looking at this. We're not driving this research. We're trying to identify the research that is, sort of functional at our level in the local communities, so that we can make informed decisions. I'm not sure there is a sort of holistic approach to, hey, we need to look at this from 5 or 6 different angles and produce something that is sort of a functional repository. I think there are very clearly areas of research that are producing data that is actually usable and consistent. But I think that there are probably gaps, and so that becomes an issue at the local level. I don't know if those gaps are perceived in the development of the codes, and very clearly Chris could probably speak to that.
Well, and I'll speak a little bit to that again. I don't represent ICC, and I'm hope that I can cover this pretty well for them. I think the important thing to remember, especially with both NFPA and ICC, is these are consensus codes. So they go through an entire development process. There are a number of people involved at all levels, and representing all industries, all interest categories. These codes are developed by people who are experts in the area and really want to affect how we're applying them and what's in them. And so it is very non-biased, and if you're interested, you can get on either NFPA's website or ICC's and look at the whole process for either their standards or their codes. But I will tell you from my experience participating in some different committees, there is so much thought and consideration and collaboration and just cooperation that goes into creating these, that I'm always very confident in the process. So I hope that helps. I don't know if Chief Bernarczyk has anything to add. She's been in codes quite a while as well.
Yeah, I would just say for those people who aren't involved in the code process, it is very lengthy. There are all kinds of experts. You could look in those first few pages of any of the code books and see who all represents that. So, and also know that, there's code cycles. So, as we've seen in the building, residential and fire code, things change every time there's a new code that comes out. There are certain tweaks for this and that. So, it's the thing. I really appreciated your presentation, Chris, because you broke it down. I think for folks like myself, who I love the code, but sometimes I find it challenging. And so I would say for anyone out there who maybe knows somebody who wasn't able to join today and they have questions about this code, rewatch this presentation. And, I appreciate the way you simply walk through those different steps and different chapters of the code for us all.
Great, everyone. This has been a real great exchange. What I'd like to do real quick as we kind of wrap this up and we're coming to our end of our 2-hour event is just ask each of the presenters if they have anything that they'd like to say as part of closing comments. So I'll start with Justice Jones.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that as Dr. Mayor Morrill said, we're trying to build a fire community here, and this is a cultural shift. It's not a code shift, it's a cultural shift first. And I think if we can change people's hearts and minds about wildfire and help them understand the science that supports sound decisions and planning, we'll turn this corner and be much more resilient as a country and as a globe. And so I just encourage everybody not to forget that we're still dealing with people, not codes and buildings.
Great. Thank you, Justice. Chris, I'm going to go to you and then allow our 2 IFC reps to kind of close out.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for allowing me to participate, and I enjoyed being here today. I want to echo what Justice said. He always says things so well, but just remember, what we are truly talking about here is community risk reduction. We're trying to reduce that risk in our communities, and there are 5 approaches to doing that. I talked about enforcement today. That's just one approach. But Justice is so good about talking about the education part, and that's going to be an important part of this. And then also, along with codes is applying the engineering parameters and approaches. And then we've got to find economic incentive. A big part of this discussion is the affordability and applicability of insurance in our communities. And we've got to continue to talk about that. And we've got to figure out a way to make sure that our communities continue to have insurance, and insurance that's affordable. And so we've got that. But then the last thing is we are always going to have a necessity for emergency response. And so we need to make sure that we're taking care of our emergency responders and making it safe for them, just like what Chief Elliott was talking about. So that's the big thing, is keep focused on the fact that we're trying to reduce these risks, and we'll do it together, and we will move this needle. So thanks for your time today.
No, thank you. Chief Elliott?
Yeah, again, thank you for sitting in. I'm sitting with subject matter experts, and I kind of feel a little bit intimidated by that. But I guess what I would like to say is I went into this with the commitment that I want to change this for my grandchildren. It's not going to change in my generation in a way that is going to be long-term, and potentially even my kids. But we owe it to those future generations to continue to push for decisions and not to blame people in the past for the decisions they've made. They've been probably made for very well-intentioned reasons. But to recognize, we got here, over 100 years through decision-making processes. It's going to take, 10 to 15 years to bend the curve, and probably 20 to 25 to really see substantial reductions. I look at private property owners, and, I say, I think there's, people get the ownership piece, but we need to begin to look at the, that effect on what our neighbors are encountering, and try to get people to look at, their community, not just their parcel of property, or not just that bottom line. And that's really difficult, but I think the pieces are all in place. And I think that this is a moment in time, where if we look back and we don't make substantial change with all of the legislation and congressional support, and, we're in the news, that, we only have ourselves to blame. And so I couldn't be, more passionate about this, and I appreciate this opportunity.
No, thank you very much. Chief Benarchek, I'll give you the last word and thank yous, and we'll close this out.
All right. Thank you very much, Rich Elliott, Justice Jones, Chris Burnett, and the retired guy, Richard Miller. Also, I want to thank the Wildland Policy Committee, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, Fire and Life Safety Section, and the International Code Council for making this happen. And most importantly, thank you for everyone who joined in today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. Everybody be safe and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much, everyone. This concludes our webinar event. The webinar will be posted shortly to the IFC site as a recording, so you'll be able to download this and rewatch it. And you'll also receive a survey directly after the webinar. This has been a great opportunity, and we'll continue to do this. I'm sure this is the first of probably multiple collaborative efforts on the IFC's part between the Wildland Policy Committee and the Fire and Life Safety Section at IFC. Thank you, everyone, and please go out and have a safe day and read the codes.